What makes a star shine even when no one is watching? What makes a storm grow in silence? Some players arrive in the NBA with a flash bright, loud, impossible to miss. Others drift in quietly, like fog across familiar streets, like wind passing through trees before the leaves even notice. Some are harder to spot, but no less powerful. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander never raised his voice to be heard. He never needed to. His game isn't about noise. It's about rhythm. His steps don't pound, they flow. His presence doesn't demand the spotlight, it makes the spotlight follow. And when he moves on the court, it isn't with the urgency of someone chasing greatness, but with the certainty of someone who knows it will come. So who is Shai? And why does it feel like the game slows down, almost sighs in relief when he takes over? This isn't just about points or passes. It's about presence. It's about feeling something you can't explain when he touches the ball. The way he hesitates, like time is pausing just for him, waiting to see what he'll do next. He doesn't roar, he whispers, and still defenses bend. Crowds stand. Teammates trust. This is not the story of someone who took the expected path. He wasn't the promised prospect, covered in headlines and drowned in hype. He didn't come through basketball royalty. His name didn't echo in gyms across the country until suddenly it did. But for those who listened closely all along, for those who heard the soft rhythm in how he carried himself, the signs were always there. From the chill of Hamilton's winter fog to the silence of Southern prep school back gyms. From late-night film study to still locker rooms after losses. Shai's journey was never about arrival. It was about becoming, and he became something rare. A calm star in a loud universe. Some nights now, he'll hang 35 on a contending team, quietly, smoothly, and when the final buzzer sounds and cameras turn, you can count on him doing what he always has, walking back with steady steps. The same look in his eyes, not asking for attention, just asking for the ball again. Because Shai doesn't seek the moment, he shapes it to so many stars come and go, shouting into this game, begging to be seen. But years from now, when box scores and stat sheets fade, we'll remember the linger of his footwork, the gliding silence of his drives, the tranquility he brought to chaos, because storms don't always sound like thunder. Sometimes they sound like footsteps echoing through a quiet tunnel, graceful, deliberate, calm. Who is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander? And how did he become the game's quietest storm? Let's follow the trail he left behind, not loud, but lasting. Hamilton sits quietly on the edge of Lake Ontario, just a little away from the louder places, Toronto's towers to the northeast, Detroit's pulse far to the west. It's a city of steel and snow, where winters feel longer and walks home from school sting a little sharper against the skin. But inside the gyms, where sneakers slide across waxed floors and the air smells like old leather and purpose, another kind of warmth grows. A warmth made of repetition, of dreams whispered under breath, of belief born from quiet. In one of these quiet gyms, a boy named Shai dribbled a ball softly before school, and sometimes after dinner. A soft cadence left, right, crossover again and again until it became music only he could hear. He wasn't the loudest voice at recess. He didn't shout to be chosen first in pickup games. He didn't need to in the cold mornings. Shai would bundle up near the window, backpack zipped, always the first ready. His mother, Charmaine, watched from behind the wheel, calm, focused. A woman who once sprinted along Olympic tracks for Antigua and Barbuda. Her own journey, filled with sacrifice and silence, had taught her something valuable. Not every champion stands on podiums shouting. Some start with one foot in front of the other until that simple act becomes everything. She passed that lesson to her son, not in words, but in action. Early mornings behind the wheel. Long drives across town, practice in one place, school in another. There were nights when Shai would finish late runs and do his homework in the back seat, his head bobbing. With each turn, fingers still stiff from drills. And through it all, Charmaine never let him forget. Excellence wasn't given, it was built. People didn't whisper about Shai then. There were no reporters in the bleachers, no crowd of scouts waiting to see the next big thing. He didn't dunk, he didn't shout, but he listened, he watched. And slowly, his game became something only those who paid close attention could appreciate. He played for St. Thomas. More in Hamilton, a place where the bleachers creaked and the light flickered over rims worn from use. For a time, Shai blended in. Another teenager in a jersey, another set of sneakers squeaking across the baseline. But there was something in the way he approached drills, in the way he absorbed every correction. He didn't react, he responded, and then came the first real decision, the one most kids his age aren't asked to make. If he stayed, perhaps he'd shine locally, win games, make memories. But only here, if he left, if he followed an uncertain path across the border. Into the unknown, he might become something more. So he left. He was 16 when he packed his bag for the USA, place he didn't know. A structure he hadn't seen. No guarantees, just chance and challenge. He transferred to a school in Tennessee, Hamilton Heights Christian Academy. Suddenly, instead of a chilly gym with familiar voices, he was living in dorms, training with strangers, walking through rhythms colder than any Canadian breeze could offer. But again, he didn't complain. He adapted. The days were long. Mornings began before sunrise with conditioning and stretched deep into nights filled with film and drills. Homework wedged in like puzzle pieces. Instead of resisting the difficulty, Shai embraced it the way a river accepts a bend. It's just part of the journey. The players around him grew flashier, more athletic. But Shai's power wasn't in speed or spectacle. It was subtle. A slight hesitation here, a slow build-up there. Coaches began to see. He wasn't just reacting to the game, he was reading it, crafting it. He grew. Not just taller, though he did, stretching toward 6'6", but deeper, more grounded. He shifted from a mid-tier recruit to someone scouts couldn't quite categorize. He didn't fit into molds. He made his own dot. By his final year of high school, Shai had become a name whispered in back rooms. He's raw, but smooth. Quiet, but in control. Not a star yet, but maybe. When college recruiters came calling, they didn't always understand what they saw. He doesn't have the killer instinct. Does he want it enough? Plays to calm, but one. School saw more than the numbers. Kentucky, a program that eats pressure for breakfast, that breathes competition. When Shai chose the Wildcats, few noticed. In a class filled with toe-pranked prospects, he was seen as a second-tier recruit, an option, a piece, maybe a backup at most. But Shai didn't mind. He'd been here before, counted out, underestimated, but always watching, always waiting. Looking back, none of it reads loud. There were no viral clips, no magazine covers, just moments. Soft-spoken, maybe, but unforgettable for those who remember. Like the time his coach asked him to run the offense for just one play. He stayed on the floor for the whole game. like the teammates who said, quietly, "He's the calm before we take over." And like the drives with his mum, miles and miles of country roads lit only by headlights and faith. Two people believing in a vision no one else could quite see, in a world that sometimes rewards volume. Shai learned to trust silence. In silence he learned to grow, and in growth he started inching towards something special, not instantly, but inevitably. Hamilton's winters kept rolling long after he left. The gyms stayed cold. The city remained quiet. But tucked inside those hours was the foundation of something rare. Not a star that exploded into brilliance, but one that rose slowly through a sky most hadn't yet looked up to see. Shai arrived in America with a suitcase and a silence that seemed to speak its own language. He didn't come with fanfare. No one rolled out a red carpet. The gym doors creaked open just like they had back in Hamilton, and all Shai had was his will, his work, and the rhythm of a bounce followed by another. Tennessee was different. The mornings were humid instead of cold. The accents were unfamiliar. But what never changed was the game. The ball still spoke to him, still answered his questions, still waited for him to make the first move. At Hamilton Heights Christian Academy, Shai wasn't handed anything. The teammates were bigger, faster, louder. Some had already committed to colleges. Some expected applause before practice even began. But Shai stayed quiet, found himself a window seat in class, a seat near the back of film study, a locker near the edge of the room. He didn't need to be in the middle. Instead, he watched. He asked more questions than he answered. When others lined up, shooting step backs, Shai stayed under the rim, fixing his footwork. When drills ended, he stayed after, sometimes just watching the ball spin in his hands like a compass, slowly finding north. He grew slowly but noticeably. Each game he played seemed to peel off a layer most hadn't looked for. He wasn't flashy, but he was efficient. Not fast, but decisive. His handle tightened, his shot steadied, his body filled out, stretching towards 6'6", and still, he hardly ever smiled after baskets. He never pounded his chest. There was always something centered in him, something anchoring. Coaches began whispering, "He doesn't play like a teenager. He sees the court like it's slowed down." But still, the offers didn't rain in like they did for others. Shai wasn't on SportsCenter. He wasn't going viral. But something else was happening. Something more meaningful. He started to run the offense not because he demanded to, or even asked, but because the team ran more smoothly when the ball was in his hands. Teammates began to trust him in tight games. Opponents reacted just a step too late. Coaches started using words like intangible and composed and leader. And the decisions began to find him. Calls from college recruiters, letters with logos, visits scheduled quietly. He wasn't the top choice for many, but for those who looked deeper, who looked beyond rankings and resumes, Shai was becoming incredibly hard to ignore. The offer from Kentucky came late at first. It didn't even sound real. The University of Kentucky, where all Americans go to sharpen their edge before stepping into the NBA spotlight. A program stacked with 5-star guards, with banners and legends in the rafters. To say yes to Kentucky was to say yes to pressure, to being overlooked by louder talents, to playing behind a crowd of highly touted names. But Shai didn't flinch. He said yes. He packed his bags again, and he walked into Lexington the same way he'd walked into Tennessee, the same way he'd checked into cold gyms back home. Head down, mind steady, ready to earn everything. The locker room was filled with stars. Everyone there expected minutes, highlight posters, and NBA scouts in the bleachers. Shai was hardly noticed. He started at the bottom of the rotation, another bench player, another support piece, but no moment overwhelmed him. No setback shook him. Every morning, he showed up early, stayed later, talked to assistant coaches when others were scrolling through phones, watched film with trainers before practices, listened, and then slowly, calmly things began to shift. An injury here, a missed assignment there. And Coach Calipari turned to Shai with the simplest direction: get us organized. What began as a testing moment became a turning point. Shai took the huddle, called plays with a calm that surprised people, delivered assists with precision, got teammates into spots before they knew where to go, and added a few hesitations that left defenders sliding where he'd already been. He didn't just keep the team afloat, he elevated it. By mid-season, he wasn't backing up anyone anymore. He was the starting point guard, the floor general, the player who brought balance when momentum slipped and confidence when shots stopped falling. Even reporters began to notice. The questions grew. Where did this kid come from? Why wasn't he rated higher? Analysts started whispering about draft potential. Kentucky fans began holding their breath when he rose for floaters or slipped past another defender. But through it all, Shai stayed. Shai. In press conferences, he spoke sparingly, never too high or too low. In practices, he gave the same focus, whether it was drills or scrimmages. And in games, he never forced anything, but still got everything he needed by tournament time. His name echoed, not loudly, but enough. The young man who'd once played in echo-filled Canadian gyms now played in arenas filled with tens of thousands. The lights didn't change him. The pressure didn't touch him. He seemed instead to exhale, slow the game, and step through defenders like rain gliding down glass. His freshman year ended with NBA teams circling. The same experts who once said, maybe now, said almost certainly, but none of that changed how he walked off the court at the end of his season. Head down, step steady, already thinking about the next chapter, because even at 20, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander knew something most people don't understand. Until much later, you don't need to fight for the spotlight. When you've learned how to lead from the shadows. The lights blink overhead, soft and drowsy, like the calm before rain. The velvet hush of anticipation coats everything in the room. Suits rustle, nervous hands tighten around bottled water. And somewhere, off camera, a voice counts down the minutes. This isn't a storm of camera flashes. Not for Shai, this is a pause. A breath held between what was and what might be. He sits in a fitted suit, charcoal grey against the soft lighting, legs still, fingers interlaced. His posture says patience. His eyes say preparation. The room is heavy with noise, but around him there's quiet. He's felt this silence before on chilly drives with his mother, during lonely practices in old gyms. He's learned not to fear it. Tonight is draft night, the culmination of a journey measured not in trophies, but in film sessions and footsteps, in hours outlasting doubt. Names roll through the speakers, promises realized, photos snapped, one after another, over and over. Shai listens. He doesn't fidget, doesn't check his phone. He watches the stage like it's a classroom. Every nod, every step up the stairs, every embrace a lesson, and then his name. 11th pick, Charlotte Hornets. But in the same breath, a trade heel, go to Los Angeles. The Clippers, 2 beats. He closes his eyes once, opens them again. The room leans in, but Shai barely moves, only rising with a quiet calm. Cameras find him, finally, drawn not to flash but to presence. He walks to the stage, slow and composed, puts on the hat not of the team he'll join, but of the team that drafted him. He smiles, softly, respectfully. But there's something deeper, their kind of peace, not relief, not triumph, something steadier, because he knows a draft pick is a beginning, not a destination, a new door, not a guaranteed welcome. He doesn't cling to logos. He doesn't cling to headlines. He walks off the stage the same way he walked onto a Kentra. Grounded later, when the interviews begin, his words are clipped and careful. Gratitude without embellishment. Confidence without chest thumping. Someone asks about being traded so quickly. He nods. Wherever I play, I'll be ready. He doesn't ask for certainty. He asks for the ball. That quiet moment after draft. Night when the new suit is hung up and the flashbulbs faders, when doubt often begins to whisper. For Shai, it's different. He stays steady. He studies his next stop, the Clippers. A team trying to rebuild. A roster with question marks. A future unwritten. The kind of place where voices rise, trying to claim ground in the unknown. But Shai doesn't raise his voice. He sharpens his tools. He flies to Los Angeles with little warning and even less noise. Morning workouts, full days of shooting, meetings with coaches still learning his name. But he doesn't wait for introductions. He introduces himself through action. He walks into the film room already holding notes. He walks onto the practice floor as though he's been there before. Because in a life filled with drifting for better opportunities, for greater tests, Shai's never struggled to find his footing. He just listens, and then he leads. Draft night never changed him. He didn't let it. He let it mark something but not define it. There was no grand speech, no viral quote, just a stillness in the moment, just the promise of movement to come. Because, while others celebrated being chosen, Shai stayed focused on becoming, and that quietly makes all the difference. Los Angeles has no shortage of noise. Horns echo across boulevards. Palm trees sway above crowded courts. Cameras flash for stars, both real and imagined. But in the middle of that city, always in motion, Shai moved at his own pace. He arrived in the middle of summer when the sun turned practice sweat into steam. Most rookies try to make impressions with declarations, dunk contests during scrimmages, rapid-fire three-point attempts. But Shai understood something different. The loudest statement can be made in silence if the work is honest enough. He didn't demand attention. He earned it. Every day began with questions. He'd ask an assistant coach why defenders leaned this way, or what Chris Paul used to do in pick. He never asked twice, because once he heard it, once he saw it played out on film, he absorbed it. Like still water accepting rain, that his game grew under the surface. Summer League was quiet. He moved fluently, defended intelligently, passed with a calm that made teammates sharper. He didn't try to prove he belonged. He played like he already did. And the Clippers noticed opening night came. Not with a roar, but with readiness. He came off the bench, first steadying a game that needed order, getting teammates the ball in their spots, getting to the rim when defenders least expected it. Coaches looked down the bench earlier and earlier each game. Then one day, without fanfare, he was starting. He guarded veterans, players with a decade of tricks hidden in their footwork and timing. Guys like Kyrie, like Curry, and while they scored because they always do, Shai never wavered. He stayed in front longer than he should have been able to, adjusted after every possession, never bitten by the same fake twice. He didn't flinch. In practices, he stayed after. Not for clout, not for attention. He shot foul shots with nobody watching, made assistant coaches join him until their voices cracked, calling out rotations. And as the season deepened, so did his role. Teammates began to trust him, not because he spoke the most, but because he rarely made the same mistake. They felt his presence, they wanted the ball in his hands, because he didn't just run the game, he read it. He shaped it in real time, adjusting tempo not with volume, but with awareness. He humbled himself on defense, and surprised with his patience on offense. Floaters over long arms, timed kickouts to corner shooters, one step ahead, sometimes two. By the time the playoffs arrived, no one called him a rookie anymore. They faced the Warriors, defending champions, a dynasty-made machine, and still, Shai looked unfazed. The lights didn't blind him. The pace didn't rush him. He scored when the floor opened, passed when it didn't dot. At one point, he dropped 25 points with no forced shots, no wasted motion, just the right move at the right time. Clippers fans watched with a kind of disbelief. How could a first-year player look like this? So calm, so collected, so certain. He didn't flex, didn't shout. He just turned back on defense, already thinking about the next possession, and then the moment that changed everything. The Clippers were ambitious. Their front office was looking to build something bigger, something instant. A championship core, now not later. That summer, a trade shook the league. To get Paul George, they needed to give up a future. That future included Shai. There wasn't anger. There wasn't bitterness. He understood to be traded for a superstar. That meant something. That meant respect, even if no one said it outright. Los Angeles had needed him as a foundation. Oklahoma City would need him as a center. So he packed his bags. Again, no statements, no farewell speech, just a nod, just a quiet goodbye to a city that never quite heard him, but always felt him. In that moment, it was clear. Shai wasn't just another rookie. He was something rarer, understated talent who made impact ripple beneath the surface. And like water, he was ready to flow into the next landscape, not loud, just inevitable. Oklahoma is wide and quiet. Unlike Los Angeles, the stars here drift across a darker sky. The roads stretch longer. The noise is softer. It's a place where time feels a little slower, and maybe that's why it felt right for Shai. He didn't arrive with banners. There were no welcome parades, just a plane ticket, a packed bag, and another sunrise over a brand new skyline. But for someone who had always found stillness in movement, it wasn't daunting. It was familiar. Oklahoma City had once been loud, thunderous even. The echoes of Durant and Westbrook still lingered in rafters and memories. But now, the team was in transition, rebuilding, relearning, searching, and into that searching stepped Shai quietly. Gradually, he became the still point in all that change. His first practices weren't about taking over. He didn't try to be the guy. He simply watched, processed, found the rhythm that others overlooked. There was Chris Paul, brilliant, guiding, a veteran with years of knowledge and trust in his voice. And Shai didn't compete with that. He absorbed it. He watched how Chris walked into huddles, how he directed defenses without raising his voice, How he lifted younger players by holding them accountable, then lifting them again with kindness behind closed doors. Chris didn't speak in riddles, he spoke in timing. And Shai learned. That year, they surprised everyone. The Thunder weren't supposed to make the playoffs. They weren't supposed to compete. Yet every night, they stayed in games they had no business winning, gritting out possessions, staring down fourth quarters. Shai averaged nearly 19 points a game, never forced, never flashy, just consistent, just calm. He became the team's leading scorer by the time the season closed, not by shouting, by showing. Then came the bubble. A virus shut the world down. Courts stood empty, arenas echoed, but the game, stripped of distractions, kept going. And in that silence, Shai grew louder without making a sound. In Orlando, in the neutral courts and hushed gyms, the Thunder leaned on him more. Chris Paul trusted him. Teammates looked his way when momentum swayed. One dribble, a shoulder dip, a floater kissed gently off the glass. He never sped up, never panicked. The playoffs came. Houston on the other side, Harden, Westbrook, firepower, and Shai didn't back away. He looked them in the eye, made key plays, took hits and got up, slipped by defenders like mist curling around corners. They nearly beat them down to the very last possession of Game 7. When it was over and the season ended, Chris Paul moved on. Others did too, but Shai stayed. The team was his, now not by proclamation, but through presence. He'd led without ever saying he should, and so the locker room listened when he spoke. Not because he had the loudest voice, but because his words came only when they were needed. The following seasons were harder. The Thunder started over. Young faces, unknown names. Some nights felt heavy. Losses piled up. The press didn't care. The lights didn't burn quite as bright, but Shai kept showing up. He sharpened his mid-range, practiced a slower release, one defenders couldn't time. Grew stronger, not bulky, but wiry and precise. His dribbles became more patient. His hesitations became art. He began scoring 30, even 40 points on nights when few were watching. Behind the curtain of national spotlight, a masterpiece was beginning to form. Stats told only part of it. The growth came in how he walked through a timeout when the team was down 20 but still told his teammates, one possession at a time. In how he helped rookies navigate long road trips. In how he celebrated assists the same way he did. Buzzer beaters. And the franchise noticed. They looked at him not as a placeholder, but as a pillar. So they offered something rare, a 5-year contract, a chance to lead this team not just for one season, but for the future. No trades, no conditions. All in, Shai signed it with the same steadiness he brought to everything else. No announcement video, no cryptic tweets, just a quiet answer to a franchise that asked for trust. He chose Oklahoma City, not because it was flashy, but because it aligned. The quiet gym, the long-term vision, the freedom to become something singular, while other stars angled for big markets and super teams. Shai invested in the slow climb. He stayed when others might have fled. Because he doesn't fear the climb, he respects it. Through knee bruises and early losses, through two-a-days and empty arenas, his game kept blooming. Quietly, and the league began to lean in. They started noticing how he'd glide between defenders like wind through trees, how his shot would hang just long enough to kiss the rim softly, how his footwork mirrored ballet instead of brute force. Broadcasters started whispering, Shai might be next. Players started praising him after losing to him. Young guards began trying to mimic him, but he never changed pace, just kept rising, each year more complete, each game more in command. And so, in a small market town built on heart and humble roots, something rare was happening. A star was emerging, not with noise, but with inevitability. Sometimes a player arrives with flash. Shai arrived with rhythm. By the time the 2022 to 2023 season began, he wasn't a prospect anymore. He wasn't potential. He wasn't a good player on a rebuilding team. He was one of the best guards in basketball, and still, he played like nobody was watching. Shai averaged over 30 points per game. Only a few players in the league touched that number. But somehow, his games didn't feel explosive. They felt composed, measured, almost inevitable. He didn't score in bursts. He scored in flows. He'd finish a quarter with 2 points, then glide through the next with 15 without even raising his voice. The defense would be pressing, the crowd humming, and there he'd be walking into his spots like the moment was made for him. Everything became slower when he moved. His step-backs didn't scream, they whispered. His Eurosteps didn't pound, they weaved. His hesitations didn't fake, they invited. There's something hard to define about watching him play. It's not just skill though, he has plenty. It's not just IQ though. His reads are as smooth as they are precise. It's peace. Shai plays with peace. When you see him glide through defenders who are faster, stronger, or louder, you realize this isn't about overpowering the game. It's about understanding it, about listening for the pulse between dribbles. The league started to notice when All-Star voting opened. Shai wasn't just part of the conversation, he was leading it. Coaches praised him. Players voted for him. Fans, many of whom had only seen a few of his games on national broadcasts, began to lean in. And when the final votes were tallied, there he was, an NBA All-Star. He didn't jump, he didn't shout, he didn't post any long captions or bold messages. Just a smile, gratitude, and then back to the work. The games rolled on. And so did Shai, scoring 33 against contenders, notching 40 against MVPs, dropping 44 in games with playoff implications. But it never felt like chasing numbers. It felt like solving puzzles. 1 foot here, a fake there. Get the defender just off balance, float it off glass, jog back. He didn't reinvent basketball, but he reminded many why they fell in love with it in the first place. Then came the play-in tournament. The Thunder, still young, still doubted, were seeded 10th last in the play-in picture. A single loss, and their season was done. First up, the Pelicans. New Orleans was stronger on paper, deeper, louder, and in the first few minutes, they looked the part. But then, Shai started carving, not with power, but patience. He drew fouls with quiet footwork, found open lanes where none seemed to exist, knocked down clutch free throws like he was standing in an empty gym on a Tuesday afternoon. 32 points, victory. Not a celebration, just a nod. Next came Minnesota, a tougher team, bigger bodies, more experience, and for parts of the game, it looked like the ride might end. But in those final possessions, amid the roars and the chaos, Shai rose up, not dramatically, not urgently, but like it was always going to happen. He took contact, absorbed double teams, got to the line, kept them close. The Thunder lost, but Shai left the floor having proven something stronger than a series win. That he belonged, that he wasn't just good, he was great, and everyone could feel it. Teammates talked about how he made the game easier. Coaches described his work ethic not with fireworks, but with phrases like repeatable excellence. Analysts began comparing him to legends not in playing style, but in presence. Around the league, a shift began. Young guards studied his timing. Older stars gave him nods after games, and still, Shai stayed the same. He wore what he wanted, stylish, but never loud. He spoke when needed, but rarely beyond that. He trained in the off-season with focus, not fanfare. He became a superstar, but if you didn't know where to look, you might miss it, because he didn't bring attention to himself. He brought attention to the game, to the joy of watching someone operate with complete control over pace, over balance, over breath. He'd receive a screen, glide around it like he was skating, let defenders chase air, raise up without rushing, and as the ball dropped gently through the net, he'd be on his way back before the announcer finished saying his name. He played on a young team in a small market, on limited national TV, but more and more people began seeking out Thunder games just to watch him work. Every drive he took was a soft declaration. I see things differently, and maybe that's what made it so beautiful. He didn't play for highlight reels, he played to win. He didn't chase attention, he let the whispers build, and they did. Because real art doesn't shout, it speaks in rhythm. And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander had become a masterpiece in motion. In Hamilton, the winters still come heavy. The gyms still echo with sneakers on hardwood. The stories keep being written, while some are only just now being told. But somewhere in that quiet city, a boy grew into something gently. The world began to notice. The game rarely rewards subtlety, but sometimes it's the subtleties that last the longest. A certain kind of glance, a pause that turns into poetry, the memory of someone who never tried to conquer the game but instead chose to understand it. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander never set out to dominate a room. He didn't change who he was to fit the league's glare. He wore what he liked. He spoke when he had something to say. He played not to be seen, but to do something worth seeing. Not every superstar is loud. Not every path to greatness needs to be blazed in flames. Some are carved inch by inch, step by quiet step, until they form a trail that nobody else could have made. And that's what Shai has done without needing to shout. Without ever breaking the rhythm he spent years learning to trust. Now when he walks onto a court, the game seems to soften just around him. Defenders lean too far, screens set just right. The ball finds him like it knows it belongs. He's not trying to outrun the moment, he's becoming it. In a game that moves at 90 miles per hour, Shai has found the value in slowing down, gliding instead of sprinting, pausing instead of pushing, waiting one extra breath for the play others don't even see yet. There are stars who demand the spotlight, and then there are those who change its shape just by stepping into it, who bring their own light, one that doesn't glare but glows. Years from now, when stats are replaced by memories, when headlines are long buried in archives, what people will recall won't be a number or a score. They'll remember how he moved, how the crowd leaned forward when he started to dribble, even if they didn't know quite why. They'll remember that look in his eyes, half focus, half quiet joy, as if each game was a private conversation between him and the sport he loved. They'll remember that even in the most chaotic moments, he brought calm. Because greatness isn't always loud. It doesn't always arrive with a roar. Sometimes It travels like a ripple, small, quiet, unstoppable. As his career continues to rise, with new seasons ahead, more games to be played, more moments to be made, one thing remains unchanged: Shai hasn't lost the quiet that made him. He carries Hamilton's winters in his blood, the stillness of early mornings, the patience of waiting when no one sees you coming. And now, all of that has become something undeniable, something unshakable. A legacy written softly, but with permanence. The game's quietest storm still moves, still builds, still whispers, and those whispers, they echo